The air in the office was always thick with the ghosts of violence and cheap cigar smoke, a hazy, permanent twilight that clung to the expensive leather furniture and the stacks of ledgers I pretended to manage. They called it the War Room, a laughably masculine title for a place where strategy was so often sacrificed on the altar of brute ego. I was at my desk, a modest island of order in the sea of their chaos, the click of my keyboard the only sane metronome against the low growl of their plotting. Kalen was holding court today, his bulk leaning over the mahogany table, jabbing a thick finger at a map of the docks. We hit them here, hard. We take their shipment and we send Malco a message he can't ignore, written in the blood of his crew. He was all fire and impulse, a rabid dog on a frayed leash. Every word from his mouth was a potential spark, and my job, my endless, unremarkable job, was to ensure the gasoline was kept safely locked away until the *right moment for fire. From the shadowed corner of the room, Joran, the consigliere, stirred. His voice was the opposite of Kalen's, a silken, dangerous thing that slithered through the air. Force is a tool, Kalen, not a solution. Malco expects a blunt instrument. Perhaps we should be a scalpel. He didn't look at me, none of them ever truly did, but I felt the subtle shift. He was testing the waters, seeing if Kalen's latest gambit had any hidden merit I might have provided. I kept my eyes on my screen, my expression a placid lake, reflecting nothing but the task at hand. My fingers flew, transcribing their threats into sterile corporate minutes. Asterisk proposal, asset reallocation at South Docks. Concerns, potential market volatility. Asterisk I was a translator, turning their grunts and postures into a language that could be filed, forgotten, or if necessary, used against them. Kalen finished his tirade with a slammed fist that made my teacup tremble. It's settled then. Helena, get the boys ready. And for God's sake, get me a real coffee. This swill is dishwater. He tossed his porcelain cup toward me, a gesture of such casual dominance it was almost comical. The cup skidded, sloshing bitter, cold liquid onto the blotter. I did not flinch. I simply nodded, my face a mask of quiet efficiency. Of course, Kalen. I'll see to it immediately. This was my camouflage. The unflappable secretary. The human fixture. They saw the neat bun, the sensible shoes, the hands that could sue the temperamental printer or forge a death certificate with the same practiced ease. They never saw the architect. My errand run was my salvation and my sovereignty. I gathered my purse, a simple, functional thing, and gave a small, subservient nod to the room. Joran's eyes flickered to me for a half-second, a spider noting the harmless flutter of a moth, before returning to his quiet manipulation of Kalen. I stepped out of the tomb-like atmosphere of the office, and into the muted hum of the city. The air outside was still and heavy, but it was clean. It didn't smell of fear and ambition. My first stop was not for coffee. It was in a nondescript back room of a city hall annex, where a portly man named Boris sat sweating under the single glow of a desk lamp. I didn't need to threaten him. I simply laid out a single sheet of paper, a transcript of a phone call he thought had been encrypted. His face crumpled, and he nodded, agreeing to fast-track the zoning permits that would strangle a Verona-backed development. Power wasn't always a gun. Sometimes, it was a piece of paper, delivered by the right pair of hands. Leaving that meeting, the tension in my shoulders began to unknot. This was the real work, the silent, precise engineering of an empire. I was turning a corner, my mind already composing the coded message to our men inside the Verona logistics team, when a voice, warm and entirely out of place, cut through my strategic reverie. Helena! I turned, and there he was, Caius. His face, usually a landscape of calm intelligence from his long hours in the OR, was etched with a concern so genuine it was almost painful to look at. He was holding a paper bag from the bakery I sometimes mentioned I liked. I thought it was you. Are you all right? You look pale. He reached out, his hand, a surgeon's hand, steady and capable, gently brushing my arm. The contact was a jolt, a lightning strike of pure, undiluted normality. This was the other world, the one I visited like a ghost haunting its own past life. I'm fine, Caius. Just a long morning at the office, I said, and my voice, even to my own ears, sounded different here. Softer. The sharp edges I used all day were carefully sheathed. His brow furrowed. That place. I don't like it. The people you work for. He trailed off, not wanting to offend, his protectiveness a shield he didn't know was raised against the wrong enemy. I gave him a smile, a real one that felt strange on my face. It's just paperwork. Dull, boring paperwork. The lie was a familiar comfort. We spoke for a few more moments, a brief, stolen exchange about meeting later, about the simple, profound pleasure of a quiet dinner. As he walked away, the warmth of his presence lingered on my skin like a phantom limb. I stood there for a long moment, the queen of a criminal empire and the girlfriend of a trauma surgeon, two souls trapped in one body, both equally real, both equally false. I didn't see the man, riven, leaning against a lamppost across the street, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the good doctor, and made a note of the unremarkable woman he was with. The threads of my two lives, so carefully kept apart, had just, irrevocably, begun to touch. The memory of Caius's touch was a fading ember on my skin, a dangerous distraction I could not afford. By the time I returned to the syndicate's headquarters, the air had shifted from its usual simmering tension to a brittle, electric charge. Kalen's planned strike at the docks had been a success, a messy, brutal affair that had left 3 of Malka's men in the water and a shipping container full of contraband firearms in our possession. The victory, however, was a pyre built on green wood, smoking and spitting, threatening to ignite into something uncontrollable. The news had reached Malka, and the response was not long in coming. An invitation. Not a scrawled threat, but a formal, embossed summons for a parley at the Obsidian Lounge, a neutral territory owned by a reclusive, retired fixer named Lysander. It was a move that reeked of Joran's influence on their side, a call for cold calculation over hot blood. The order came down from the mythic, unseen crown, a directive I had drafted and encrypted myself. We would meet them. We would hear their terms. Kalen took it as a sign of weakness, a prelude to surrender. He paced the war room like a caged tiger, his knuckles raw and bruised from the dockyard festivities. "This is a mistake," he growled, the words vibrating with suppressed fury. "We have the momentum. We should crush them now, while they are licking their wounds." Joran, ever the counterweight, sat perfectly still, his fingers steepled. "Malka would not call for a talk unless he was worried, or unless he has a play we cannot yet see. To refuse would be to show fear. We go. We listen. We assess." I sat at my desk, the silent scribe, recording their debate. My pen moved in smooth, even strokes, inscribing their bluster and suspicion into the official record. Inside, my mind was a chessboard, moving pieces they couldn't see. This meeting was not an obstacle, it was the centerpiece of my design. The night of the parley arrived, heavy with a portentous quiet. The Obsidian Lounge was a place of whispered histories and settled dust, a tomb for dead deals. I was to wait in the armored town kai, a block away, the faithful secretary ready with documents, a secure phone, a clean firearm. My role was to be a nonentity, a piece of the scenery. From my vantage point, I watched Kalen, Joran, and 2 of our most reliable soldiers, Torin and Varric, disappear through the polished brass doors. The street was unnervingly calm. I could feel the silence pressing in, a predator holding its breath. My fingers, resting on the cold metal of the phone in my lap, were perfectly steady. This was the moment the first domino was meant to fall. The first sound was not a gunshot, but the shattering of glass, a high, violent crescendo that tore the night apart. Then the staccato thunder of automatic weapons fire erupted from within the lounge, a roaring, chaotic symphony that lasted for a lifetime compressed into 10 seconds. I did not move. I calculated. The timing was precise. The location, perfect for an ambush. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. Through the car's window, I saw the doors burst open. Torin stumbled out, his shirt dark and wet, firing blindly behind him before a final shot from inside dropped him to the pavement. Varric never made it out. Then came Joran, clutching his side, his face a pale mask of pain and fury, half-dragged by a bleeding Kalen, who was roaring a stream of obscenities into the night. They piled into the backup vehicle, which screeched away from the curb, leaving behind only the ringing silence and the spreading stain of failure. It was only then that I allowed the performance to begin. I let my hands tremble. I forced my breath into ragged, shallow gasps. I pressed myself against the car door, my eyes wide with a terror that was not entirely feigned, but was directed at the catastrophic scale of the gamble I had just won. When the first police car arrived, its lights painting the elegant facade in frantic strokes of blue and red, I was the picture of shattered innocence. A detective, his face weary with the seen-it-all expression of his trade, opened my door. "Miss, can you tell me what happened?" My voice was a fragile thread, breaking on the words. They just started shooting, inside. I think they are all dead." I let a single, perfect T trace a path through my makeup. It was a masterstroke. As I was being led to a police cruiser for my own safety, my gaze, blurred and helpless, swept the perimeter of the crime scene. And I saw him, Riven, the Verona soldier from the street corner. He was standing amidst a small crowd of gawkers gathered behind the police tape, his face not shocked or horrified, but grimly satisfied. His eyes met mine for a split second, and in them I saw no recognition of a rival queen, only the brief, dismissive noting of a civilian casualty, a piece of collateral damage. But then his gaze sharpened, shifted, and locked onto something, or someone, behind me. I followed the ghost of his glance, and saw the paramedic unit arriving, and my blood went cold. Stepping out of the lead ambulance, his face set in the focused, professional calm of a man entering a crisis, was Caius. Of course. This was his district. This was his hospital. The world I had just set ablaze had called in the one man who represented its opposite, and he had answered. Riven's eyes darted from my face to Caius's, and back to mine. A slow, ugly smile spread across his features. He had not found a player in the game, but he had found a string. And he knew, with the instinct of a predator, that every string has a weakness. He turned and melted back into the darkness, leaving me standing there in the artificial light, the grieving secretary on the outside, and a sovereign whose perfect, ruthless plan had just birthed an entirely new and deeply personal vulnerability. The police released me after 2 hours of repetitive, gentle questioning. They saw a secretary in shock, a woman whose world had been violently unmade by the business of her employers. I gave them nothing but fractured sentences and wide, uncomprehending eyes. They offered me a counselor. I declined. All I wanted, I told them in a voice that trembled with exquisite precision, was to go home. But home was not my sterile, safe apartment. Home was the war room, now a ghost ship with its crew decimated. And home was also the one place I knew I should not go, but the only place I could possibly seek refuge from the gale I had myself summoned. I found myself standing outside Caius's door, the polished brass of the numbers seeming to glare at me in the dim hallway light. I had not called. I had simply appeared, drawn by a gravity I could no longer resist. When he opened the door, his face was a complex canvas of surprise, profound relief, and a deep, professional exhaustion. He had just come from the Obsidian Lounge, from the carnage. He didn't speak. He simply opened his arms, and I walked into them, the solid, steady reality of his chest a bulwark against the chaos. The scent of antiseptic and clean cotton on his clothes was a perfume more soothing than any luxury. For a long moment, I just stood there, letting him hold me, feeling the frantic, bird-like flutter of my own heart begin to slow its panicked rhythm against his calm. He led me inside, his home a sanctuary of quiet order. Books on anatomy and volumes of poetry shared shelf space. A cello stood in a corner. It was a life built on healing and beauty, a universe away from the world of taking and breaking. He set me on his sofa and brought me a glass of water, his movements efficient, practiced. When the call came in, and they said it was the Black Crown. Helena, I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. The fear in his eyes was a raw, honest thing, a stark contrast to the calculated masks I wore every day. He knelt before me, his surgeon's hands, capable of such precise miracles, gently tilting my chin. "You ice cold," he murmured, his thumb stroking a slow, warm arc along my jawline. He fetched a blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders, then began to clean a small, forgotten smudge of blood on my wrist, not my own, a microscopic transfer from the car door handle. I watched him work, the focused intensity in his gaze. This was a man who fought death with every fiber of his being, who stitched torn flesh back together. And I was a woman who orchestrated it, who delivered bodies to men like him in bags and pieces. The dissonance was a physical pain, a nausea rising in my throat. "You have to leave that place," he said, his voice low and urgent, cutting through my spiraling thoughts. "It's not just a job anymore. It's a death sentence. Tell me you'll quit. Tell me you'll walk away." He was pleading, not ordering. He saw a victim to be saved. He had no idea he was begging a queen to abdicate her throne. I looked into his eyes, those deep, earnest pools of normalcy and compassion, and for one terrifying, exhilarating second, the truth balanced on the tip of my tongue. *I am the crown. I planned this. They were disposable. I am not a victim. I am the architect. The words were a tidal wave held back by the most fragile of dams. But I saw the absolute faith in his gaze, the belief in the woman he thought I was. To shatter that would be to destroy this sanctuary forever. The wave receded. I let out a soft, shuddering breath and leaned forward, resting my forehead against his. "It's complicated. Chaos," I whispered, the light tasting like ash. "There are things in motion. I can't just walk away." It was the most honest thing I could say to him. He accepted this with a resigned sadness, mistaking my meaning for the trapped loyalty of a subordinate. He held me again, and we sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. In that quiet, I felt the two halves of my soul tearing apart. The Queen was already assessing the damage, planning the next move, calculating how to use Joran's survival and Kaelin's death to her advantage. But Helena, just Helena, wanted to stay here, wrapped in this blanket, in this man's arms, and let the world outside burn itself to cinders without her. It was a beautiful, pathetic fantasy. I had unleashed the beast, and now I had to ride it. To protect this, to protect him, I would have to become more of a monster than I had ever been before. The peace I found in his apartment was the most dangerous illusion of all, because it made me want things I could never, ever have. And wanting, in my world, was the one luxury that could get you killed. The sanctuary of Chaos's apartment faded into a haunting memory, a dream I had no right to revisit. The syndicate's safe house, a sterile, anonymous penthouse with a panoramic view of the city I intended to claim, was my new reality. Joran was propped in a high-backed chair, his face pale and waxy, a bandage stuck against his side. The remaining cell leaders, a grizzled, paranoid lot named Silas, Vorlin, and the quietly menacing Brinja, stood in a tense half-circle, their expressions a volatile mix of fear, anger, and a desperate hunger for direction. The air was thick with the stench of their panic, a scent I knew well, the pheromone of a herd that had lost its alpha. They believed their king was dead, or missing, or had abandoned them. They were looking to Joran for salvation, but his eyes, clouded with pain and calculation, kept flicking to me. He was the only one who had ever looked close enough to suspect the shadow behind the throne. I stood by the window, my back to them, my posture not that of a grieving secretary, but of a general surveying a battlefield. The city's lights twinkled, a galaxy of opportunities and threats. I let their anxious murmurs continue for a moment longer, let them feel the full, suffocating weight of their perceived helplessness. Then I turned. The click of my heels on the polished concrete floor was a deliberate, silencing sound. Every eye in the room snapped to me. "Kaelin is dead," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of the tremor I had perfected for the police. "Torin and Varric are dead. Our operational capacity has been reduced by 60%. A statement of fact, cold and clean. Silas, a man built like a brick wall, slammed his fist on a table. "We are finished. Malka has broken us." "No," I said, the single word cutting through his despair like a scalpel. "He has pruned us." A profound silence fell. I began to pace, slowly, my hands clasped behind my back. Kaelin was a blunt instrument, loud, predictable. His ambitions were a liability, his methods a beacon for our enemies. He was negotiating with the Veronas behind the crown's back. This was a lie, but a necessary, elegant one. It reframed a catastrophe into a strategic purge. I saw the dawning comprehension in Joran's eyes, a flicker of grudging, horrified respect. "The crown," I continued, "is not a man. It is an idea, a system, and it is far from broken." I stopped and faced them fully, my gaze sweeping over each of them, claiming them. The Crown saw this betrayal. The Crown allowed it to happen to remove a cancerous limb. And the Crown, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper, has been here all along. I let the silence hang, a heavy curtain before the final reveal. Then I walked to the head of the table, where no one had dared to sit, and placed my palms flat upon its surface. Malka did not attack a rival. He committed an act of treason against his sovereign. And for that, there is only one response. I looked at Joran. His face was a pale mask of shock, but his mind, that brilliant, slippery mind, was already racing, connecting 1,000 tiny clues, my unfailing access, my calm in every crisis, the way the mythic Crown's orders always aligned so perfectly with my presence. He was the first to understand the terrifying scale of the deception. He did not speak. He simply lowered his eyes in a slow, deliberate bow of his head. The others, watching their cunning consigliere submit, followed suit one by one. The transition of power was complete, without a single shot fired in this room. I began to issue orders, my voice now the clear, unquestioned authority. Brinja, you will reach out to our contacts in the finance ministry. I want Malka's legitimate holdings audited, frozen, and dismantled by the end of the week. Silas, your crew will target their logistics chain. Not with violence. With rust, with faulty fuel, with bureaucratic delays. Volan, the Dockworkers' Union is in your pocket. Shut down every port entry point for Verona goods. I laid out a campaign of economic and political strangulation, a war fought in boardrooms and shadowy back channels, not back alleys. It was a display of tactical genius they had never imagined their secretary possessed. As they filed out, their fear now transformed into a sharp, focused energy. Joran lingered. The surgeon, he said, his voice low. The Veronas have been asking questions. They see a thread. I did not look at him, my gaze fixed on the city. They see a thread because I allow them to see it. I lied, the cold knot of fear for chaos tightening in my stomach. He is irrelevant. A misdirection. Do not divert resources to him. It would only confirm a value he does not have. Joran nodded, accepting the logic of a grand strategy he could not fully see. When he was gone, I was alone in the vast, silent room. The Queen was crowned. The machine was in motion. But for the first time since I had conceived this plan, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the one, fragile, human thing I had left unprotected in a world I had just set on fire. The war I had declared from the penthouse was a silent, invisible plague upon the Verona Empire. Their legitimate businesses were besieged by a sudden, inexplicable cascade of health inspections, tax audits, and revoked licenses. Their shipping lanes clogged with bureaucratic tie, their warehouses mysteriously condemned. The financial bedrock upon which Malka's brute strength was built was turning to quicksand, and he was thrashing, a beast who understood the feel of a knife in his gut but could not see the hand that held the hilt. I watched his desperation grow from my new command center, a web of data streams and encrypted communications that painted a perfect picture of his impending ruin. He was reacting exactly as predicted, lashing out with increasing, undisciplined violence against the phantoms he perceived as his enemies, further alienating his allies and drawing the unwanted gaze of federal agencies. My design was unfolding with a beautiful, terrible precision. And then the pattern broke. A single, anomalous data point, a flicker on the periphery of my surveillance web. A known Verona associate, a low-level thug named Riven, was observed making discreet, circling inquiries around the city's central hospital. He wasn't asking about doctors or patients in general. His questions were specific, pinpointed. He was asking about schedules, about offers, about a particular trauma surgeon's routines. Chaos. The thread Joran had warned me about was no longer just a loose fiber, it was being actively pulled. A cold, sharp dread, entirely separate from the cold calculus of my strategies, pierced through me. This was not part of the design. This was the chaos of a cornered animal, a move born of stupid, reckless instinct. Malka, unable to find the source of his torment, was going to break what he could reach. He was going for the secretary's boyfriend. I stood from my console, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear of color. My first, primal impulse was to summon a legion of my soldiers and encircle Chaos, to turn him into a fortress. But that would be a fatal admission. It would scream his importance to the heavens, confirming Malka's desperate gamble and making Caius a permanent, high-value target for every enemy I would ever have. I could not protect him by claiming him. I had to make him disappear, to spirit him away to some remote corner of the world until the last ember of the Verona name was extinguished. But even as the plan formed, I knew its flaw. Caius would never agree. He would demand answers. He would see it as a kidnapping. His life, his work, his very identity were rooted here. To save him, I would have to reveal the monstrous truth, and in doing so, I would annihilate the very men I was trying to protect. The choice was taken from me before the thought could fully crystallize. An alert chimed, a soft, insistent tone from a dedicated monitor tied to the hospital security feed. The camera from the staff parking garage. I watched, my breath frozen in my lungs, as Caius, still in his scrubs, walked toward his car. I saw 2 dark sedans glide into the frame, blocking him in. I saw Riven step out, along with 3 other men. There was no struggle, no dramatic fight. It was a clinical, efficient extraction. One man opened the car door, another placed a hand on Caius's back, guiding him in with a terrifying politeness. He went, his posture confused, then resistant, but it was too late. The door closed. The sedans slid away, disappearing into the evening traffic, as if they had never been. The entire event lasted 20 seconds. It was silent. It was clean. It was an execution of my one, fragile hope. The room around me seemed to warp, the eye turning to glass. The screens filled with frantic activity, my subordinates reporting the abduction, asking for orders. Their voices were a distant buzz. All I could see was the empty space on the monitor where Caius had been standing. A strange, profound quiet settled over my mind, silencing the whirring calculations, the strategic permutations. The fear was gone. The dread was gone. In its place was a clarity so absolute it was like a religious awakening. Malka had not just taken a man. He had defied a natural law. He had reached into my world and tried to use a fundamental force, my one point of connection to something other than power, as a lever. And in doing so, he had signed the death warrant for every single soul who bore his name. My hand, which had been trembling a moment before, was now perfectly steady as I keyed the comms link to Joran. My voice, when it came, did not sound like my own. It was low, devoid of emotion, the calm at the eye of a hurricane. "They have taken what is mine," I said, the words final and absolute. "There are no more rules, no more strategies. Burn it all. I want the Verona family erased from this earth. Leave no one." The game was over. Now, there was only the harvest. The command center fell into a silence more profound than any I had ever enforced. The air grew cold, as if the very atmosphere had drawn a sharp, anticipatory breath. My order, delivered in that flat, absolute tone, hung in the room for a single, suspended moment before the machinery of my syndicate erupted into a frenzy of controlled, homicidal activity. I turned from the screens, from the ghost of Caius on the parking garage feed, and walked to a reinforced cabinet. Inside, laid out on black velvet, was not a crown of jewels, but the tools of my first, most visceral identity. The matte black polymer of a custom-built pistol, its weight of familiar comfort in my palm. A series of wicked, slender blades sheathed in leather. And the final piece, a form-fitting suit of tactical gear, black as a starless night. As I dressed, the efficient secretary, the calculating queen, she melted away. The armor was not a new skin, it was the old one, the one I was born to wear. I was not Helena Vogt, and I was not the crown. I was der Todesschrei, and the death scream would be sung tonight in a key of utter annihilation. The drive to the Verona compound was a journey through a city already feeling the first tremors of my wrath. We passed a Verona-linked nightclub engulfed in flames, the work of Silas's crew. A block over, Bringe's financial hit had manifested as a repo team forcibly seizing a fleet of luxury cars from a dealership Malka used as a front. This was not a covert war anymore, this was a public execution. We arrived at the compound, a fortified warehouse district Malka believed was impregnable. The assault was already underway, a symphony of controlled chaos orchestrated by my people. But I was not here to orchestrate. I stepped out of the vehicle, and the world narrowed to the crosshairs of my intent. The first guard at the perimeter gate died before he could raise his rifle, a single, precise shot between his eyes from the darkness. I moved through the outer defenses like a scythe, a ghost in the smoke and panic. Each shot, each silent, knife-edge takedown, was not a strategic move. It was a release. A memory surfaced, unbidden, as I slipped a blade between the ribs of a man shouting into a radio. *I am 17. The scent of oil paint and old paper fills a sunlit studio. Elian, his fingers stained with color, laughs as he tries to teach me how to mix the perfect shade of cobalt blue. His hand guides mine, his touch gentle, his world one of creation, not destruction. He is my anchor, my secret. He knows nothing of my family, only the girl I pretend to be with him. They find us, not because of who I am, but because of who he isn't. His father refused to pay a protection fee. 2 of my grandfather's own soldiers, acting without his knowledge, kick in the door. They make me watch. They call it a lesson. They hold me back as they beat him, as they break his painter's hands, and finally, as they put a gun to his head. The sound it makes is not loud. It is a small, final punctuation. The last thing I see before my world fractures into a million shads of agony is the spray of his blood across the half-finished canvas, a violent, terrible masterpiece. The sound that tears from my throat is not a scream of grief, but a raw, primal shriek of pure, undiluted rage, a sound that chokes the men who hold me, a sound that earns me my name. Todesschrei. That was the day the queen was conceived in a womb of vengeance, and the assassin was born from a scream. I blinked, the memory receding as another body fell at my feet. I was inside the main warehouse now. The heart of the beast. I saw Malka, a mountain of a man, roaring orders, trying to rally his crumbling forces. He saw me, and his eyes, wide with a confusion that swiftly turned to a dawning, horrific recognition, locked onto mine. He wasn't looking at a rival. He was looking at a force of nature. He raised his weapon. I was faster. 2 shots took out his knees, dropping him to the concrete with a bellow of pain and shock. I didn't kill him. Not yet. Where is he? My voice was the grating of stone on stone. He spat a curse. I put a bullet through his shoulder. Way! A whimper came from a side office. I kicked the door open. Caius was there, tied to a chair, bruised but alive, his eyes wide with a terror that morphed into sheer, uncomprehending disbelief as he saw me standing there, armed and armored, drenched in the evidence of my profession. In that single, shattered look, I saw the man he thought I was die. The relief of finding him alive was a fleeting, secondary note in the symphony of our ruin. As I moved to cut him free, Malka, driven by a final, desperate surge of hatred, dragged himself up, his good arm raising a fallen pistol, aiming not at me, but at Caius's back. I fired. My shot was perfect, hitting him square in the forehead. But his dying reflex, the last clenching of a muscle, jerked his finger on the trigger. The report was deafening in the small room. Caius jolted forward as the wild shot meant for his spine tore into his side. I caught him as he fell, the warmth of his blood seeping through my armor, a stark, terrible contrast to the cold that had encased my heart. I held him, the chaos of the final battle fading into a distant hum, the victor kneeling in the ruins of the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The warmth of his blood was a searing brand against my skin, a final, brutal message written in a language only I could understand. I held him there, on the cold, grimy concrete of his prison, the sounds of the final skirmishes outside fading into a meaningless whisper. His breath was a ragged, shallow thing, each gasp a painful echo in the sudden stillness. He looked up at me, and in his eyes there was no fear of death, no panic. There was only a profound, devastating clarity. He was not seeing the efficient secretary, or the lethal assassin, or even the ruthless queen. He was seeing the whole, tragic architecture of my life, the gilded cage of power I had built for myself, the isolation that was the true cost of the crown. A flicker of something that was not forgiveness, but understanding, passed through his gaze. He tried to speak, his lips trembling, forming words that had no sound. And then, with a final, soft exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of all the peace I would never know, he was gone. The light in his eyes, that stubborn, beautiful ember of humanity, simply went out. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the silence of a door closing forever, the silence of a world stripped of all color. I did not weep. I did not scream. The part of me capable of such human expressions had died with him. Gently, with a tenderness I did not know I still possessed, I closed his eyes. My hand, stained with his blood, lingered on his cheek for a moment longer, a last, futile connection to the dream he represented. Then, I stood. The movement was fluid, automatic. I stepped over Malka's corpse without a second glance, walked past the bodies of his men, and emerged from the warehouse into the chilling air of the new dawn. My soldiers, Brinja, Silas, Volan, they were gathered there, their faces etched with the grime and triumph of a hard-won victory. They looked at me, expecting a speech, a coronation, a recognition of their loyalty. They saw a sovereign who had just obliterated her greatest rival. They saw the unassailable queen. Joran approached, his expression carefully neutral. "The city is yours," he said, his voice low. "The Verona legacy is ash. What are your orders?" I looked past him, past all of them, my gaze fixed on the horizon where the first weak rays of sun were beginning to bleed into the night sky. His question hung in the air, a simple request for direction that demanded an answer which would define my reign for all the years to come. I could rule with mercy, in Chaos's memory. I could build an empire that was not just feared, but perhaps, one day, respected. I could try to forge a legacy he might not have been entirely ashamed of. The thought was a beautiful, fragile ghost, and I let it pass through me and vanish. That was not the world I lived in. That was not the woman I was. Mercy was a weapon I did not possess. Respect was a currency I had no use for. My throne was built on a foundation of bones and cemented with the blood of the one good man I had ever known. To Dishina, that sacrifice with sentimentality would be the greatest betrayal of all. I turned my head, my eyes meeting Joran's. The last vestiges of Helena Vogt were gone, locked away in a tomb of her own making. What remained was pure, unadulterated power, cold, absolute, and eternal. My voice, when it came, was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the sound of a vault door sliding shut, final and irrevocable. "No more anchors," I said. The words were not just a command, they were a vow. A vow to never again be vulnerable. A vow to never again allow a crack in the fortress of my will. A vow that the queen would rule, alone and unchallenged, from this day until her last. I turned and walked toward my waiting car, not looking back at the ruin, not looking back at the body of the man I loved. There was no past anymore. There was only the future, a long, cold, endless road of dominion stretching out before me. The story of the secretary and the surgeon was over. The legend of the queen had truly begun. And so, the reign of the Black Crown continues. The streets are quiet now, but peace is a fragile illusion in a city held in a grip of iron. New players will emerge, old grudges will fester in the shadows, and the queen's rule will forever be tested. If you dare to step back into this world of whispered loyalties and blood-soaked betrayals, if you wish to witness what happens when a heart of ice is all that rules a kingdom of shadows, then ensure you do not miss what comes next. The game of power never ends. It only evolves. Subscribe now, and be the first to know when the next chapter in this dark saga unfolds. Your front row seat to the throne awaits.